All right. Welcome, everyone. It's another session of Signals Roundtable. I am Bob Batchelor. This is our series where we tackle today's biggest marketing challenges, or at least pretty big. I normally say that we tackle these challenges that actually move the needle. Today, I'm going to say let's keep this needle steady. There's a lot of change going on out there with this wild thing of Google's AI era and paid search. So holding steady might be the right move right now, not just trying to grow everything. Let's, peel this onion back and look at this. But before I get too far ahead of myself, and this isn't an advertisement, it's just a little bit who we are so you know who in the world is talking. A little context on Ad Taxi. We're probably the largest agency that you've never heard of. We maintain strong relationships with the major platforms. We're one of Meta's first business partners, along with TikTok. A day one partnership with Trade Desk 15 years ago. And probably more importantly for this discussion, a Google Premier partner, which ties to this Google AI era that we're about to discuss. And with me, who's sitting on this lovely screen, you've got Scott and Caleb, this dynamic duo. They spearhead our search operations team. They are the brain trust of this company on that side. And they oversee an incredible team managing a massive amount of campaigns, have a direct line to Google. We do beta products with them. We're testing products. We're analyzing performance strategies. If there's an Oz behind the curtain, it's Scott and Caleb. And Scott is part of our three timer club. So Scott, welcome again. And Brian, it's always a pleasure working with you. Brian oversees our strategic accounts, and he has the keen ability to kind of geek out on the data and yet take all that and apply it for strategies for our largest customers and all of our customers, really. It all trickles down. So honing the solutions for that. Just a little bit. We try to keep this to 30 to 40 minutes. So quick, salient, in and out. But this is a pretty robust, tough topic. So I'm happy I want to dig right in and not waste any more time. Google just recently rolled out its biggest upgrade to the search box in 25 years. Commentators are out there, they're screaming, they're saying, this is the end of the keyword auction. It's now going to AI-powered conversational environment. Everybody's up in arms. Paid search isn't dying, folks. But the rules certainly are changing. Brian, let's start off with you. You just wrote this article, talk about geeking out again. The conversational shift, re-engineering paid search for Google's AI era. That can be found on our website as well on our blog section. But you're advising advertisers on ways that they can prepare for the upcoming changes with Google search. What does that really mean for a business?
Well, Bob, this is one of the bigger announcements, right? So as Google mentioned, as you mentioned, they're calling it the biggest change to paid search in the search box in the last 25 years. It's probably one of the biggest changes people need to think about. Similar to what happened when people started to think about like how does search react differently on mobile devices versus desktop. And I don't think paid like saying paid search as we know it is going away probably like a little overstated, but I do think people need to think about it differently and prepare around not so much keywords but more signals. And I think that's kind of where things are moving in the AI age. Google is clearly, I think, threatened by all of what's happening from ChatGPT, Anthropic, all of these things. People can find information different ways now. They're not sort of the only game in town, but they also have a absolutely massive leg up on that game because they've got all of this data on us going back in perpetuity for however many years on all the things that people have been searching. And so when you think about like the context of signals in Google's universe, it's not so much now what people are searching for specifically, like a keyword. It's not going to like one or two keywords. People are thinking about search in a different way around like, hey, what's the best running shoe for over the hill dude who's got like bad heels and stuff, right? Like what are those kinds of things that people are going to be searching for? It's not just like running shoes near me on sale. So the context of the conversation is changing, and that means that the context of like the signals that we are as consumers are sort of giving Google is changing. And I think that kind of changes just around how advertisers need to think about these things. And it's not just keywords; it's also other things, multimodal, whether it's like images or other things. Got a ways to go on that, but I'll stop there and you know let these other guys get in a word.
Sure. Scott and Caleb, you anything to add on that?
Sure, I'll jump in and thanks for having me again, Bob. Appreciate your tolerance and patience
Thank you.
for my desire to participate. I think what Brian wrote in his article, and I think everything that going on with Google right now is really exciting and interesting, and has a lot of potential implications for advertisers. I think when we talk about the change that's happening, and we talk about this kind of AI transition phenomenon, however we want to describe it. I think we want to pull apart kind of a few different components of it, and almost speak to those differently. And I think one of the important components, and a potential limiting factor to some extent, is um, consumer behavior. What is going to be the rate of change and rate of adoption um, of using Google as an AI tool, like users use ChatGPT versus how they've used it for the last 25 years, since kind of the tried and true search for something, get results, three paid ads at the top, organic listings below it. And I think that's kind of an unknown. That's kind of an unknown element here. I think how how users' willingness to adopt more of the AI kind of AI tool features is going to be really interesting as we move forward. And that's going to have a lot of implications for how paid search changes, what the rate of change is going to be, how quickly Google is able to roll out some of the features that they appear to want to roll out as we move toward more of an AI chat tool. Uh, State that Google's in. I think the other things we'll need to think about going forward are, so first, kind of the user end platform changes. So what does the tool look like to users? There's more of these kind of AI overviews, AI inputs, how the tool is changing for consumers and what that means for advertisers. The second is, obviously how consumers themselves use it. The third is how Google is using and ingests data. And I would suggest that this hasn't changed dramatically in the last few months. The world hasn't turned upside down here. To Brian's point, Google already knew a lot about its users. It's infusing what it knows about its users into what their search results are, whether they're coming, however they're coming. And then the other way is, how are the platforms changing? How are the inputs from advertisers and operators changing? And in what ways is Google changing those? And in what ways do we need to adapt? And I think all of those things have slightly different answers, and I think are really interesting components of this discussion moving forward.
Yeah, Google definitely has a slight leg up. It's very interesting on that side. Caleb, but on the flip side, the client, that's the most important part of this. What are you hearing from brands right now? Is there like anxiety about this? Are they seeing click rates dropping, or businesses are kind of unaware? What are you hearing from them?
That's a really good question, Bob. And I think, from our perspective, and really what we're hearing is more just general curiosity, both in the sense of how do we start serving in some of these AI modes and AI platforms, which is starting to get a little bit more kind of known within the ecosystem of products we can select within Google. But also, too, it's kind of how is this going to change how people interact with their brand? And I think that's where they have a little bit of kind of apprehension. And a little bit of this is going to evolve over time, just as people, as kind of Scott and Brian have alluded to. We're going to get more information about how consumers are using AI mode, how they're using Google search, how other search Google products, Gmail, YouTube TV, YouTube are integrating with these is a lot of the changes that Google are making isn't, for us on the advertiser side necessarily around what the consumers are seeing. It's the products that we're using, and that's what Google's putting a roadmap towards. So for us, it's really just guiding brands around, dip your toes in the water. If you're an apartment complex or if you're a shoe advertiser, just go into AI mode, Gemini mode, and try to find products. Think of how the consumer would look for apartments, or think of the questions that they would ask, and just make sure that your website and your brands and your Google My Business pages are highlighting those things, because that's going to be the biggest kind of differentiator in the advertising space. Is how are we setting ourselves apart from a conversational AI or conversational search standpoint? Are we ingesting images? Do we have YouTube videos? Because we're Gemini shifting and we're Google shifting, is it's just more conversational, more multi-product. So they're going to integrate, Google My Business page if you're looking for a local search. So it's really, from a client standpoint, just asking the questions of how are things going to shift. And we're already seeing a lot of those shifts, as Scott alluded to. It's not anything new, where Performance Max has been around for 2 or 3 years at minimum. Now Performance Max is kind of baked into potentially some AI based search models. So those are things that we're actively testing and investigating, as well as just going through and being a user and a consumer and pushing ourselves to look in the AI ecosystem. So I think that's the bigger kind of client-based perspective, is just an understanding of what's happening. And then there will be down the road just, things that we have to talk about with clients, of just changes in click-through rate, changes in, conversion tracking, moving to maybe potentially a view-through kind of conversion model. So there's stuff that, as we get more information and kind of, have the ability to serve, we'll be able to provide more context and guide our advertisers and clients in a good and meaningful way.
Wow. That was a lot to unpack, man. It's like you just like, okay, here's the agenda. Let's go through this. Let's go through that. But you kind of hit on some points, and you talk about like a little bit of that shift from conversational questions. You talked about PMAX, uploading photos, all the different things. Like, what's that? So now, how's your world changing? Scott or Caleb, start with it. What are you optimizing for? I mean, how is this impacting your day to day? Because that was a lot. So,
Yeah, that's a good kind of follow-up question. But I think for us, being in the Google ecosystem, I've been doing Google Ads for 15 plus years. Change is not new in Google Ads, as Brian alluded to. He made the comment around mobile. There's been, big, massive search changes where, they've been eliminating ads and changes around ad copy. So for us, while this is a big change and a big shift on Google's side, evolution is just kind of normal in our landscape. So for us, it's more diving into what Google's pushing products as they're determining what the roadmap needs to look like and giving us kind of where things are going. So we just have to jump in and test Performance Max, test AI Max, and really just be not, first in line to do some of these things, but really just make sure we're understanding and getting an understanding of what to do, what optimizations to make, things that we can add to campaigns. As before, it was really just structure, keywords, negatives, and now it's much more holistic, where we need to be taking into account video assets, image assets, audiences. So for us, it's just continued evolution. And a lot of that evolution just comes from running these campaigns, testing, and doing what we need to do to be successful for our end advertisers.
awesome. Scott, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of Caleb's points are valid. I think one thing that we want to always consider too is the evolution of, again, coming back to how are users going to interact with the new landscape. And I think that's something that is still sort of TBA. And it comes back to that question of how will users use the new layout? So will users continue to put in, you know, more direct intent-based queries, or is the tool going to push us to a place, and this seems likely, where more of the from a search perspective, at least, more of what we're targeting are longer, more kind of conversational queries. So I think that becomes, well, how can advertisers better get themselves in front of those queries? And there's two ways. I think one, from an operator perspective, um, we should be responsive to campaign types and search intents that are coming from longer queries, while still keeping in mind that all of this, from a keyword perspective, if we want to call it that, is still text based. The queries may be longer. We're still targeting strings of text. So in that sense, there isn't that much of a change. But I think from advertisers' perspective, and Caleb mentioned this as well, um, a lot of what is served is going to be based on advertiser content. So in some ways, it's how a mindset of how we've sort of traditionally thought about SEO, optimizing content and getting content putting content on landing pages and videos and markup and things like that that are going to give Google clues as to what the intent of that content is so that it can better direct um, users that are served paid ads the best content. And so there's almost kind of an organic, SEO component where we're going back to advertisers and saying, hey, we need to clean up your website. We need to clean up your landing pages. We need to get more metadata, more answers to holistic questions, because that not only will help your organic performance, but also your paid performance as well. So there's a lot more going into it now, I think, than there ever has been in the past.
I think that's a great point, Scott, because if you think about like the old rules of like quality score, it's all about relevance, right? Like the reason why Google was trying to be as relevant as possible and trying to serve the most relevant ads to people as possible is because they want people to keep coming back to Google. It should be one click, right? You do like you find what you need and you move on. And I think that the relevance piece is changing now a little bit, where relevance isn't just keywords and landing page and ad copy, but it's all of the other things. So, kind of going back to the context of like, like what does your website say about you? I think Caleb, you mentioned it. Like, what does your Google business profile say about you? If you remember that scene in Elf where he's going through New York and it's like best coffee in New York, right? It's like it tastes like crappy diner coffee. You can't say that you're like the best whatever in wherever city you are if you have a 1-star Google review with like 500 reviews. The AI is going to be like, sorry, you're not the best. So it's those types of signals and thinking through those things. And even better yet, if you're asking a specific question and your website doesn't necessarily have that answer, you might miss out on that. And I think that like, tying this back to what you're saying earlier, Scott, around like the consumer behavior, like is all going to depending on like when they change. Like consumers have almost always moved faster than marketers. This is one of those instances where I think like Google is saying like this is happening. You need to be prepared because this is going to be happening and we don't want anybody, I mean Google probably from like a monetization perspective doesn't want to be left out either. But I think like, from it's our job as an agency to sort of like coach our clients on these are the different types of ways that this landscape is changing and the things that you should do to prepare for those types of things. Because I think that like, when you think around, in the past, having, it's good SEO, Caleb, to your point, to have your images have like alt text and don't just have like image 1234 dot PNG, on your homepage. It should be a description of like what that actually is. Or if there's things like, your videos, like describing like what's in your videos, transcriptions, whatever it would be that can help on your YouTube channels. Not everybody has those things, but if you think around just like, thinking like a machine, what is the AI going to read? What going back to the consumer context, like all of these things are going to be critical for how to prepare. And do you use it? Who knows if Google's going to actually use it? But our job is to help, I think, like prepare people to know that like there's a good chance that if that this is going to happen sooner than later because Google may just make a switch at some point and hey, here you go. More people get AI mode by default now.
Yeah. They've never done anything like that before.
Never. And
Yeah.
never backtracked either. Yeah.
Yeah. I I'm just so impressed, Brian. Anybody that can weave in Elf and World Greatest Coffee, you're always going to be on these calls. Uh, let's get a little tactical, and I want to dig into Brian's question article. Just on his one thing, he's step one. He had 7 steps, but step one was auditing the dependence between on traditional clicks and separating the brand and non-brand search. Why is that the first move? You know, why was that one the step one on that?
Well, I think it kind of goes back to, and Scott, I'd love to hear I mean, Scott, Caleb, your guys' thoughts on this too, but that's kind of always been, I think, like the challenge. And so going back to when PMax rolled out, PMax is like AI search. It'll find, like the promise of PMax is like, hey, just throw everything in there. We'll go ahead and put it wherever it's going to get the best possible performance. What we found, I think, traditionally is that PMAX in particular was just cannibalizing a ton of branded search. Now that the search terms are available in PMAX and you can see that, it's kind of validated that. That said, you still might end up getting a lower cost per result by having your brand in PMAX. But thinking through, like, brand versus non-brand, if someone's searching for you directly, like adtaxi.com, that's the majority probably of like where your conversions are going to come from. So understanding like how much of what's coming from brand versus non-brand, I think that the real opportunity from an AI perspective is around how can you squeeze the most performance out of a non-brand search, something that's tangential that people aren't even really thinking about you. That they have a problem and they don't know that you can solve it because they just don't know what's out there for it. That's where I think the AI piece is going to come in. So I think understanding from a business perspective, like what's your traditional reliance on that? Brand probably isn't going to go away. You're still going to show up. I mean, anybody can go navigate to a website and show up there. I think the non-brand piece and specifically like that sort of like tangential non-brand where you're secondary to brand or something that's like the next step down as opposed to like a really long tail. Those types of things I think are going to be key.
Caleb, Scott?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a really interesting thing. I think we're going to be, um, I think I think in kind of the new ecosystem, I think there's going to be so many components that go into um, evaluating a what resource from a paid perspective that Google puts in front of a user. And I think in some ways it harkens back to me a little bit to again coming back to SEO kind of changes to Google 10 years ago where the importance of brand strength and brand mentions and brand prominence within organic search listings became a bigger factor in organic listings um, where where Google is looking for the correct resource and the correct ad to serve. And yes, it's leaning into kind of the traditional, bids um, relevance model, but it's also looking at deeper signals of relevance, like to Brian's point earlier, and Caleb mentioned this as well, where it's rating how many Google reviews your brand has, how many 5-star reviews, how many what is the overall kind of trust in your brand and prominence in your brand, the reliability of your brand and your website holistically as a resource, and that may actually play into how where and when your ad is served, whether that's translated into traditional kind of ad strength metrics, um, or it's translated in more subtly. So, for us, I think that it becomes with campaign types like AI Max and P Max in kind of a future state, and this isn't in the status quo, things that might come in more almost on the back end in a non-branded search space in the way that organic sort of works a little bit more holistically. And I think as we get pushed more toward that direction, just kind of overall, as we get pushed, as Google moves more toward AI incorporating a lot more signals than it does now in terms of where and when ads are served. I think also on the opposite side of that, I think that the idea of guardrails become really important. So we're giving AI more control, but at the same time, we need to become really cognizant of what guardrails and what boundaries we're putting around it so that doesn't we're not wasting budget and that we're training the AI to do the correct thing. And I think two things that advertisers can do. One are get your first party data house in order. So making sure that
100%.
we have, make sure that systems and ads platforms, for example, are being connected to first party data, whether that's through CRMs or uploads. There's a lot of options to do that we can help you through. And then the other things that Brian and Caleb also talked about, which are um, making sure that your content, website, metadata, everything that Google could pull in to rank you to determine if your ad is the best ad for the client is really, really buttoned down. And that, for example, all the pages on your website that you hypothetically could be landing pages and served as a resource by Google's more AI forward tools are ready, ready for a client to see, have great content, answer clients' questions holistically, have paths to conversion through them. And all of those things are going to be more important than ever as we move forward kind of into the next phase of this.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're kind of coming up like a little bit of time because I like to keep these short and for the audience, but I really want to cover two more areas. One is just a general thought, but people, everybody, not everybody, but some people are starting to see some shifts in behavior. You were talking about Google pushing AI, Scott. Um, you know, some people are seeing clicks come down a little bit. So, how do we make sure clients aren't starting to freak out and they see it as campaign failure? How do we coach clients on that? Caleb, you want to take that?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, Bob. And I think with all the things that we've kind of just talked about on the kind of consumer side and just how things are shifting within the Google ecosystem, our expectation is we are going to see a shift in, just click behavior, click-through rates potentially dropping due to kind of more view-through based products. But for us, it kind of goes back into what Scott was just talking about, where we need to make sure that we're giving Google the right data and the right information. So for us, the biggest shift has been historically, conversions are more so used as general guidance as to what's going on within the campaign, how users are interacting with the ads that we're serving. We now need to kind of shift our focus and how we think of conversions as a little bit more direct, as in what's impacting the business and making sure that we're only giving Google back information on what's actually driving relevant and usable in users to the business that can convert. So for us, we need to remove some of like the lower funnel conversions, things that are irrelevant from a Google and a bidding ecosystem, and really just putting in things like booked leases, conversions, more kind of bottom of the funnel. As if we're putting other stuff into Google in the AI modes, it's going to be giving questionable signals. So for us, it's just data cleanliness at the conversion level. And then Brian also mentioned it as well too, just education from our clients on why things are shifting and why things are changing. Where for us, it's okay if click-through rate drops. If when a client hits the website or when a user hits the website, they're more educated. They know if you're an apartment complex, you have the bedrooms that they're looking for, that you're dog friendly, that you have a pool. Where in old Google search, you might not know some of those things prior to hitting the website, but in conversational AI, those questions might be answered due to your Google My Business pages, the content on your website, is that's all integrated into Google now. So that's the thing that we need to think through is yes, click-through rates drop, but that might be okay if consumers are more educated when they hit their website or if they're hitting the exact product page that you're trying to push. So there's going to be shifts holistically, but we need to kind of educate our consumers. And then more importantly for us as an agency, have the backbones in place to give Google and other ad platforms the right signals to optimize efficiently.
Right.
100%.
Yeah, I think this is one of those ones that's just so critical what the clients are the businesses are seeing, and it starts to put shock waves through. You get a little anxiety. So I want to expand, or not expand, but just Scott, Brian, anything to add on that? Is because this to me is like where the rubber meets the road on this.
I mean, I think Caleb nailed it. I think that I mean, traditionally what we are seeing or what we've seen recently, you probably are going to have, if you're looking at your Google Search Console, for instance, you're going to have a ton more impressions, that like alligator effect, right? Like a ton more impressions going up. The traffic is coming down, but the quality of traffic is improving. So you're getting a higher, you should expect to see higher conversion rates overall, depending on what you're measuring. And to Caleb's point, making sure that you're measuring the right conversions is absolutely critical because everything with machine learning, you tell it to go find you this, it will. So if you give it something that's a false positive, you're potentially wasting your budget. So I'd say that's probably the number one thing is don't necessarily worry about quantity, but more around quality.
Cool. All right, let's wrap this up. A little bit of just one more question. We talked about, Brian, your article. First step is, auditing brand, brand. But outside of that, is that first step, what's the thing that you really want businesses to take away from this and calm their fears as, AI's shifting things?
I'd say there is a lot, right? There's a lot to deal with and it can be overwhelming. So first off is just don't freak out. think Scott mentioned this earlier, but like put yourself in consumer shoes. Like try and be a consumer, search up your business, try and search around like these things. Not everyone has a product feed. Not everyone is going to like every business is different, right? So just kind of think through your consumer. Look at what your competitors are doing. Think through sort of like what they're doing. But it's baby steps. Baby steps will get you somewhere. It just takes a little bit longer, but you have to start somewhere. And so just start thinking about it, start planning, because it will happen eventually. And it's just better off just to be prepared.
Awesome. Scott, Caleb, lightning round.
I mean, what I was going to say pretty much would be what Brian just went through. I think it's being open-minded and one testing things. I mean, what we see in the search and just general advertising ecosystem is not everything has to be successful. We do things to test and to get a better understanding of what's going on. So we might be testing new Google products. They might not be successful, but some of these Google products are also going to change over time. So I think both from our perspective as an agency, as well as, advertisers and, end users of Google products, just being open-minded to change and knowing that just because the state that something is in now doesn't mean that it's going to be that way in 4 or 5 months or 2 or 3 years. So it's going to evolve over time. Google has a roadmap that we don't have visibility into, and I'm sure they're making plans that are going to make the products better that we leverage. So just, yeah, as Brian alluded to, just continue to test, be open-minded, use the products, and try to be a consumer for the things that you're selling or the goods that you're trying to push.
Cool.
Yeah, I think I agree with both Brian and Caleb. I would say I think part of the challenge of this is that we don't know the rate of change. So Google is driving this on one end and consumer behavior is driving this on the other, and advertisers land somewhere in the middle. So I would say the best course of action is to live in the moment. Let's continue to do what's working now while preparing for the future and testing new features and new opportunities as they come in, to Caleb's point. I think two things that advertisers, and I'd reiterate, can do right now is one, get your first party data in order. It's going to become increasingly important to drive performance as we move into the future. And the second is things that are website content, other assets that you own. Keep in mind that all of those are going to become important for paid search in the near future. And so to start thinking about your content and your website and your brand from an AI perspective is going to be really important as well. And I think those are two things that advertisers can start doing now to prepare for the future.
Awesome. Well, appreciate your time and your expertise as always. Um, One thing that I, kind of heard over and over again is that rate of change, and I think it's also what keeps the things exciting for us in the marketers, but for certainly nerve-wracking for businesses. So, if you want to audit your campaign, little plug here. We're happy to kind of like assess where you are, look at your current state of readiness. Just reach out to us. We're at adtaxi.com. The guide is on there. I've referred to that a few times, depending on how you're viewing this video. The link could be in the description. But we appreciate it. Next month, we're going to be covering a mid-year check-in on campaigns. So getting more ROI, make sure you're ready for the second half of the year. So again, Brian, Scott, Caleb, as I can't speak, thank you very much. Appreciate it. And you guys have a great day.
Thanks for having us, Bob.
Thank you all. Thanks,
Thank you.
Bob.
Cheers.
Cheers.